At exactly 3:17 a.m., telephones began ringing. Not one telephone, thousands. Across hospitals, offices, abandoned houses, police stations, railway platforms, and private homes, disconnected telephones rang once. Only once. No number appeared. No caller ID registered. And when the receivers were lifted, there was no voice. Only breathing. Slow. Patient. Waiting. Then, beneath the static, one frequency appeared. 18.2 Hertz. For 34 years, the Oversight Committee believed Project Dial Tone was an experiment. They were wrong. It was a warning. And tonight, the warning would finally end. 7 years after the archive disappeared, Case File 011 confirmed what the surviving records could never explain. The archive had not created the impossible events. It had been built around them. Every missing researcher, every corrupted recording, every 3:17 a.m. transmission, every appearance of the unfinished circle, every memory that vanished after being observed. They were not separate incidents. They were fragments of one event. Project Dial Tone was humanity's first modern attempt to understand that event. It would also be its last. The original project began in 1989 beneath Black Ridge. Officially, the facility was an atmospheric research station. Unofficially, it contained 17 concrete chambers and one room that did not appear on any architectural plan. Room 0. That was where the first telephone was installed. No wires connected it. No external signal reached it. Yet every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., the telephone rang. Researchers called the phenomenon dial tone. They assumed the sound came from underground. They were wrong. The sound came from somewhere that had no location. The first surviving recording was made by Elias Thorne on November 3, 1989. At 3:17 a.m., the telephone rang. Thorne answered. For 11 seconds, nothing happened. Then he heard himself breathing from the other side of the room. The room was empty. Then the receiver spoke. "Do you remember the door?" Thorne asked. "What door?" The voice answered. "The one you already opened." The recording ended. That was the official story. A notebook recovered decades later suggested Thorne returned every night. He simply stopped returning to the same version of the facility. By 1991, Project Dial Tone had recorded 1,204 transmissions. Most contained nothing. Some contained breathing. A few contained voices. 3 contained names. Daniel Voss, Miriam Kovacs, Adrian Holt. The problem was simple. None of those 3 people had joined the project yet. The committee classified the recordings. Then they changed the experiment. Instead of waiting for the telephone to ring, they called it. The number had only one digit, 0. When the call connected, every light inside the facility turned off. The telephone rang again. This time it rang from inside the walls. Then the concrete began vibrating. 18.2 Hertz. The frequency was below normal human hearing. But everyone inside the facility felt it. Some felt pressure in their chest. Some felt a hand touching the back of their neck. One researcher heard his dead mother's voice. Another disappeared for 17 seconds. When he returned, he remembered events that had not happened. The committee called the event a synchronization failure. They created a rule. Never answer the telephone after the 3rd ring. The rule lasted 6 months. Then Daniel Voss broke it. He answered on the 3rd ring. The line was silent. Then Voss whispered, "I can see them." Kovacs asked, "See who?" Voss turned toward the observation window. Hundreds of empty chairs were visible on the other side. The room beyond the glass was supposed to be a concrete storage chamber. It had never contained chairs. Voss pressed his hand against the glass. "They're waiting." Then every chair turned toward him. The recording ended. Voss disappeared 48 hours later. The committee erased the incident. They erased his name. They erased Project Dial Tone. And they created the archive. The archive was designed to remember what the rest of reality had forgotten. But Case File 011 revealed the fatal mistake. The archive did not contain the phenomenon. It was feeding it. Every recovered memory weakened the boundary. Every observation made the circle more complete. Every name restored brought something closer. That was why the archive kept erasing itself. It wasn't malfunctioning. It was protecting the world from what it remembered. Kovacs understood this too late. On the morning after case file 011, she found a cassette tape on her desk. No label, no date, only 4 numbers written in black ink. 317. She played it. Static filled the room. Then a voice appeared. Her own. Older. Exhausted. Terrified. If you're hearing this, the archive has failed. Kovacs froze. The recording continued. Do not search for the source. Static. Do not reopen Black Ridge. Static. And whatever happens. A long pause. Do not answer the final call. The cassette clicked. Then her future voice whispered. It already knows your name. The tape stopped. At that exact moment, every telephone in the building rang. Kovacs stood motionless. 1 ring, 2, 3, then silence. She looked at the clock. 3:17 a.m. The room had no telephone, yet one stood on the desk. Old, black, disconnected. The receiver lifted by itself. Kovacs did not touch it. A voice emerged. Dr. Kovacs. She closed her eyes. Who are you? The answer came softly. You know. No. You remembered. The room changed. The walls stretched. The floor became stone. For 1 second, Kovacs stood inside the underground chamber beneath Black Ridge. Thousands of chairs surrounded the unfinished circle. Every chair was occupied. Every silhouette faced her. At the center stood the shadowless hand. But this time it held a telephone receiver. Kovacs understood. The telephone had never been a communication device. It was a door. 18.2 Hz was never the message. It was the sound of the door remaining closed. The final transmission was not an invitation. It was a warning that the lock was failing. Then the voice spoke again. Complete the circle. Kovacs shook her head. No. Remember the missing name. No. Open the door. She stepped toward the circle. Then stopped. Something had changed. The unfinished circle was no longer carved into the floor. It was carved into her memory. She could see every missing person, every erased facility, every forgotten report, every impossible photograph. They were all pieces of the same shape. The archive had spent 34 years trying to forget one thing. Not a creature, not a god, a memory. The memory of the first time humanity observed something that should never have been observed. Before the archive, before Project Dial Tone, before Black Ridge, there had been another witness, a child, the first witness. Thousands of years earlier, the child entered a cave beneath the mountain. Inside, they found an unfinished circle, an empty chair, and something waiting beyond it. The child did not see a monster. They saw themselves, older, standing on the other side. The child remembered the future. That was the original paradox. Humanity did not discover the thing. Humanity remembered it. Every civilization that encountered the circle created a method of forgetting. Caves were sealed. Names were removed. Cities disappeared. Stories became myths. And eventually the archive was created. Project Dial Tone was simply the modern version of the same ritual. The telephone rang because something on the other side needed a witness. The archive erased records because memory was the lock. The unfinished circle was intentionally incomplete. The final piece was observation itself. And Kovacs had just become the last witness. The voice returned. Remember my name. She stared into the darkness. What is it? Silence. Then every chair in the chamber turned simultaneously. The silhouettes stood. For the first time they moved. Not toward her. Away. All of them walked backward into darkness. One remained. A small figure. A child. The child stepped toward the circle. Kovacs recognized the face. It was hers. Not as she was. As she had been. Before she remembered anything. The child raised one hand. And spoke. You already know what happens next. Kovacs whispered. No. The child smiled. You always say that. The telephone rang. One final time. Kovacs lifted the receiver. Not because she wanted to, because she understood. Someone had to end the call. The voice on the other side was almost inaudible. "Thank you for remembering," Kovacs answered. "I remember." The frequency changed. 18.2 hertz became silence. The unfinished circle began collapsing inward. Not opening. Closing. The chamber shook. The chairs vanished. The child disappeared. The darkness folded into itself. Above Black Ridge, every clock stopped. 3:17 a.m. Then moved forward. 3:18. For the first time in 34 years, morning continued. The Black Ridge facility disappeared. Not erased. Finished. Every surviving project dial tone record corrupted simultaneously. Tapes became blank. Hard drives became empty. Photographs lost their subjects. Names disappeared from databases. The archive ceased to exist. But one thing remained. A handwritten page. Kovacs wrote it before leaving the chamber. Contained only 3 sentences. 18.2 hertz was never the source. It was the lock. And the lock is closed. She placed the page inside the final project dial tone file. Then she burned the file. The fire produced no smoke, no ash, no heat, only silence. Years later, investigators would search for Black Ridge. They would find nothing. No facility, no tunnels, no project dial tone. They would conclude it was an urban legend. That was exactly what Kovacs wanted. Some memories are dangerous. Some discoveries should remain unfinished. Some doors exist only to stay closed. But on the final night of Kovacs's life, an old telephone was found beside her bed. It had no cable, no battery, no connection. At 3:17 a.m., it rang once. Kovacs opened her eyes. She looked at the telephone. She smiled, and did not answer. The ringing stopped. 17 seconds passed. Then the receiver moved slightly. A whisper escaped. Not from the telephone. From the room. Observation continues. Kovacs closed her eyes. The whisper vanished. Outside, the first light of morning appeared. And beneath the world, something waited. Not awake, not asleep. Remembered, but unfinished. For 34 years, Project Dial Tone had searched for an answer. The answer was never a word. Never a frequency. Never a creature. It was a rule. Some things survive because we remember them. Other things survive because we don't. The archive learned the difference too late. Humanity learned it once. And tonight we remember again. 3 knocks. A pause. Silence. Then the final transmission. 18.2 hertz. Not a signal. Not a call. A boundary. The line goes quiet. The archive remains forgotten. Project Dial Tone is closed. Case file 012 is terminated. There will be no case file 013. Not because nothing remains. Because nothing else needs to be found. The story ends where it began. With a telephone. With a door. With a choice not to open it. For the first time since 1989, 3:17 a.m. passes without a response. No ringing. No breathing. Only silence. That silence is the ending. And it must remain one. 3 years later, an archive worker discovered a sealed box without a classification number. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No author. No date. No project name. Only one sentence. The final call was never meant for Kovacs. The worker read it once. Then forgot it. He placed the paper back into the box and sealed it. No copy was made. No photograph was taken. The box disappeared from the inventory the following morning. And that is where the record ends. Not with another mystery. Not with another transmission. With forgetting. Because that was the purpose of the lock all along. Project Dial Tone was never meant to discover what waited beyond the circle. It was meant to make sure nobody completed it. Kovacs understood. Holt understood. The archive understood too late. Now the world does not need to understand. It only needs to leave the door unfinished. Record status. Closed. Observation status. Terminated. Memory status. Contained. Project dial tone. Ended. Final transmission. Complete.